Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our session on models for measuring success, specifically focused on models for measuring SaaS success, where today we're going to explore some different areas in terms of SaaS metrics, and especially with the impact of changing business models. We'll get down into some specifics in terms of revenue metrics, share paths of how to implement these and enable these things, but also lessons learned. And we'll also talk about different technologies and again, a lot of best practices and how to use these different types of metrics. This is been an ongoing discussion in terms of defining metrics, how to implement them, and then getting specific, like again, on recurring revenue type of metrics. So we're very excited to have some great individuals to help with this conversation today. And in no particular order, we have Gareth Maclachlan, who's the SVP of Transformation at Trellix. We have Nishant Nair, who's the founder and CEO of RecView. We have Sandeep Patil, who's the VP of Revenue Operations at Cornerstone, and our own Christine Lau, a director from KPMG in our finance transformation practice. So thank you everyone for joining. And what we want to just get into is just start chatting about this topic. And maybe Gareth, if I could start with you, when we talk about SaaS metrics, and there's obviously many business metrics, but as SaaS has become near and dear to all of our hearts as an offering, what would you say are some of the top three metrics that you have decided, or you see that you and other companies cannot live without?
So thanks, Jim. Thanks for inviting me to this. It won't surprise you if I say that we focus heavily on annual recurring revenue, ARR, and then we also kind of watch NRR and GRR, net retention and gross retention. Now that makes it sound like we're, know exactly what we're doing at all times. It was a very tortuous journey to get to those particular ones, because 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, everything was just bookings. How much money could our sales guys get in on the last day of a quarter? That's all we really cared about.
Hey, Christina, maybe I could come to you, kind of share with our audience what you're seeing in terms of how clients and companies are implementing these metrics and which ones you're seeing, and just maybe elaborate it, and even a little bit more on the renewal side as well.
Okay, wonderful. Thanks, Jim. Christine Lau here. I'm with KPMG, director in the finance transformation practice. I have worked with a lot of companies on their process improvement, finance transformations, and most recently, I worked with a startup in the customer success domain. So the few metrics that we like and really value is the ARR, annual recurring revenue, the customer acquisition costs, as well as churn, just to make sure that the renewals are coming in. And then our views on renewal is that we want to start early, and making sure that especially the enterprise level customer, they'll have a white gloves treatment, that we start discussing renewal, understanding like the needs, and if there are any product features that they need to have, we'll address that. And from another metrics that we were looking closely at is the customer acquisition cost. The reason is that we spend a lot of time with the marketing team on acquiring customer. So understanding that metrics will help drive the business moving forward.
Something Christine said there kind of sparked a thought, or kind of spurred me. Renewals is so important. One of the mistakes we made is we focused and thought about NRR and GRR. Now, we're a $2 billion company. We have 45,000 plus enterprise customers. NRR, GRR changes very, very slowly. And so one of the things, I think this is kind of a key point you were making, Christine, was to actually look at just how much was up for renewal in a quarter and really look at the churn on that. Otherwise, we might see a 0.01% change in NRR, we ignore it. It's only when you start to look at kind of what's really happening on a customer segment basis within that it starts to become important.
Great, thanks, Gareth. I'd like to bring Nishant into the conversation. So Nishant, hello and thank you for joining. And maybe if you could introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about RecView, which is amazing, and maybe then we can comment on what you've heard here in terms of the technology investment in this changing market and some of the capabilities that you've been reacting to for your clients and the companies in this space.
Sure. Thanks, Jim, for inviting me to the forum. My name is Nishant Nair. Quick introduction: founder and CEO of RecView. In terms of renewals, I know that we talked a little bit about renewals. I feel renewals is, for a recurring revenue business, renewals is like a lifeblood, right? It's an opportunity for both customers and service providers to assess the value being delivered and the way it's being delivered. It's an opportunity again, right, to introduce any new business models. I mean, you might have a customer who is on your traditional business model, and renewal might be a time when you can approach and talk to them about moving from a traditional model more to a recurring revenue model, right? So those are all the important features where, important milestones that renewal conversation can essentially facilitate.
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Nishant. Sandeep, we're talking about the sales operations, interacting with other teams like engineering, products, customer success support. Maybe we can pull that thread a little more, and maybe we could talk about the interactions, but then also maybe even go into some of the the discussions on the data elements. Like, so how do we educate people on these metrics? But then just as importantly, how do we gain agreement and consensus on numerators and denominators and where that information sits? Maybe you could give us a couple of perspectives there.
Absolutely. Great question. Right? And, the way, I see role of revenue operations is specifically in that domain, right? How can you be the glue or connecting tissue across different siloed groups within the company, whether it's marketing, customer success, product, sales. So one of the things I've done consistently, I'm doing in current role and previously as well, is having common definitions. And there is nothing called over communication in that perspective. You constantly have to define and educate. And to your surprise, every team may have different definitions, and they're not wrong. It's just you got to enforce a mechanism where you bring all these teams together. You define in a consistent manner. You educate team, and you also drive more purpose around why we are defining something in a certain way.
Hey, Gareth, coming back to you, in terms of like how the SaaS business model relates to changing environments, in terms of like mergers and acquisitions and implementations and integrations of technology. Maybe you could chat about some of your experiences of how you've handled that from for the different revenue models, especially as you mentioned, software, hardware, et cetera, and services. So maybe you could give us a little bit of insight on some of your journeys with the M&A world there.
I will do. Obviously, if I think about it in terms of the M&A process, we've just been through the integration of the two companies. We had one level of maturity on the FireEye side. We had a different level of maturity on the McAfee side. We had different terminology. Back to Sandeep's point, we would say ARR, and the other team would say, no, ACV. And we go, oh, you mean total ARR? No, but that's also including hardware over this depreciate. It was messy. So part of it was about just trying to get to that standardization of language. It was also about just getting the sales teams up to the same level of maturity. I don't think we realized when we started any of these journeys that product management, strategy management can't just come in and say, hey, it's now all going to be subscription. But because your sales teams are still quoted based on total bookings, they completely ignore everything about ARR and ACV. So we had to go through a long process of actually trying to explain it to them, change the way in which we did compensation, quota. We had to put tools in place. We had to make it easy when you go into Salesforce to quote. How do you see what the ARR is for this particular quote? How do you see whether you're increasing it or reducing it? All of those things had to play in. And with the merger, the integration of both FireEye and McAfee within Trellix, this is where we have all of the fun of completely different SKU models, different data sets, everything that kind of Sandeep was talking about. Just trying to bring that stuff together takes, just is extra friction within the journey of getting the company to recognize and start to use the same metrics.
Jumping in here, I can totally resonate with you, Gareth. As soon as we change the compensation structure with the sales team and aligning our vision on how to measure the overall business performance, both customer success team, sales team, marketing, all align on one language. Our renewal process was becoming slightly easier because we were working towards one common goal.
Yeah. And Jim, just to add to what Gareth and Christine just said in terms of M&A, one of the challenges that I've seen with M&A is a blend of different revenue models that companies now have to manage and align post-merger, right? Data tends to be in silos in different systems, and it pretty much becomes impossible to get a centralized view of customers, contracts, revenue, profitability, because you might have shared some common customers, but they have completely different contracts in different systems, right? Now, how do you get that central view of customers? And I believe that's where, that's where most of the technology and implementation comes into play, is to solve that problem, is to essentially bring those disparate business models, different customers' contracts onto one system so that you get that view of profitability, you get that view of revenue in one central place.
Fantastic. Nishant, I'd like to come back to you. In terms of everything we've talked about here, and just I think about the RecView journey, maybe you could comment on how, as you saw these business models evolving, how you prioritized and started to, define the capabilities you would provide in your technology. But then also on the same side of the other side of that coin, maybe what you're seeing coming, evolving, in terms of what's coming next. Because I think it's, you have a very great perspective in terms of working with clients on what they need, and then automating those and then tricking it out, so to speak. So maybe you could just give us an idea of how you capture some of that info and evaluate it and make decisions about that.
Sure, Jim. Again, right, and it's happening, right? We can see it everywhere as companies move towards more recurring revenue business models, right? One insight or learning that I would like to share is that the SaaS business, or the recurring revenue business model, tends to be operationally much more complex to manage than your traditional model, right? And you're looking at every organization across industries moving towards recurring revenue. Whether you're selling a chair or selling a car, there is a subscription waiting for you. But behind that, selling a chair or a car as a one-time model, and the difference between selling them as a service is huge operationally. And I think both Sandeep and Gareth talked about how every part of the organization has got to be involved in making the recurring revenue shift or transition successful, right? And technology, talking about technology, definitely technology has been a great enabler of SaaS business models. But the challenge, I believe, is choosing the right technology. See, no business is the same. Every business is different. The complexities that they deal with are very different. So choosing the right technology that fits your business model and having that organizational buy-in is very important for recurring revenue business models to succeed, right? And that's what we have seen constantly with enterprises and even with our customers, actually. It's not an easy road, in short.
Yeah, fantastic. Gareth, I wanted to ask you, we were talking about metrics in top three. We have a lot of great information here. What levels are you seeing, that required to really navigate and communicate this topic? Like, what are some of the things you're seeing in terms of like the level of the metrics?
That's a great question, Jim. I mean, we started, I think, like most companies, at just looking at things at an overall company basis, ARR, GRR, etc. Then we very quickly realized that because we've got a lot of different products and a lot of different engineering teams and different owners, that actually we needed to kind of take it down a level. We need to start looking at those same metrics on a per product basis. We even started thinking about, well, is it cloud or is it on-prem, different form factors? And at each level that you go down, it feels like you have to add another set of metrics to help explain. If I move, customer dollars from email protection to network protection, is that a loss? It's not. It is on a product basis, but not on a customer basis. So you start having this matrix of customer views and product views all rolling up to an overall company view. But that's, we're struggling our way through it. I'm sure Nishant and Christine probably have much smarter ways of helping us think about it.
Well, listen, I have one more question for the panelists, and maybe Sandeep, I could start with you. You are clearly battle tested, in terms of your experience. So I just got to ask you, like, what do you wish you knew before starting on this journey of implementing SaaS metrics?
I definitely would have been smarter, but I think, in all seriousness, just knowing that how disparate data becomes through different systems and definitions, as we talked about, is key. Just having that awareness. So just to begin with, no assumptions. Don't assume everything is consistent across the board. Second important aspect is people and their motivations. Being in different groups within the organization, they do things differently because of their motivation. So that impacts on what KPIs we are tracking and how they will behave. So knowing your audience is key. And ultimately, the last thing I would say is at the end of the day, these metrics and data systems all coming together for one purpose is you got to be good at telling the story through your numbers. So numbers and data, they're instruments to tell a good story in terms of what we should do, how you're guiding your organization. So having that maturity, having that knowing these things early on will definitely help anyone on this journey. But I definitely wish I had that maturity early in my career as well.
Great, Sandeep. Hey, Gareth, maybe same question to you.
So I think probably three things that I wish we'd thought about before we started. The first is really the role of the sales team. It takes 2 years to drive this sort of change, particularly a sales team going from bookings to ARR. Sales guys cannot cope with a change to a sales plan anything other than on the first 2 weeks of January. So you have to kind of plan for how and when you can do that, and you have to take them through stages. I think the second bit is probably thinking about the source of the metrics. We spend a lot of time doing it off of revenue systems. Revenue doesn't look like anything that the sales team recognize from a bookings basis. It all gets manipulated based upon discounts and bizarre accounting rules. So it took a long time for us to say, actually, we're going to measure all of our ARR and NRR, GRR actually off of an order basis rather than a revenue basis. And I think the third thing that I wish we'd known up front was measure change in NRR, GRR, ARR on a rolling 4-quarter basis. For a long time, we took change quarter to quarter and then annualized it. It went up and down all over the place. We all got nauseous watching it. It was terrifying. Once we kind of started to move to just a rolling 12 months, we were able to control the business a little better.
Thanks for that, Gareth. Nishant, same question for you, but we'd really be interested in your perspective from where you sit in terms of how you serve this market, what you see your customers needing and what's coming. So maybe you could opine on that as well.
Sure, Jim. So from my perspective, the difference between a product and a product as a service is the service part, right? I mean, if you look at any recurring revenue business model, it's a continuous cycle of delivering value to your customer. And that requires all teams in your organization, sales, engineering, product, customer success, and support, to work towards just one goal, which is customer success. So it's all about the service that you provide. It's all about the value that you provide to your customers in the new recurring revenue business model.
Great. Christine, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to add on to that is that, having alignment with everyone in the organizations, particularly leadership with different departments, getting them together to think and having the one vision, that was something that, I wish I had known sooner. Because, like Gareth said, the sales team have different way of thinking. They think booking more. They tend not to